German language levels explained, A1 to C2 intro, 0,00050. You have just arrived in Germany. Maybe you want to find a job, study, communicate with your neighbors, or simply understand what the person at the supermarket is saying to you. And then you start hearing these strange combinations. A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. Maybe somebody tells you, you need B1 German. And you think, what exactly is B1 and what happened to A1 and A2? Don't worry, in this video we are going to make the German language level system very simple. By the end, you will understand the journey from your first German words at A1 all the way to advanced German at C1 and C2. Let's begin. What are A1 to C2? 0, 50, 1, 30, A1 to C2 are language proficiency levels based on the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, usually known as the CEFR. Think of it like a staircase. At the bottom, we have A1 and A2, the beginner and basic levels. Then, B1 and B2, where you become increasingly independent and confident. And finally, C1 and C2, advanced and highly proficient language levels. So let's climb this staircase together. A1, your first German. Imagine you have just started learning German. At A1, you are taking your first steps. You can introduce yourself. For example, Hallo, ich heiße Anna. Hello, my name is Anna. You can say, Ich komme aus Indien, I come from India, or Ich wohne in Frankfurt, I live in Frankfurt. You can also ask very simple questions. Wo ist der Bahnhof? Where is the train station? Or Wie viel kostet das? How much does that cost? At A1, your vocabulary is still limited and you need people to speak slowly and clearly. But something important has already happened. You are communicating in German. Think of A1 as, I can survive very simple situations in German. A2, everyday, basic German. Now let's move one step higher. A2, at A2, German starts becoming more useful in everyday life. You can talk about your family, shopping, work, transportation, appointments, and simple daily activities. For example, Ich möchte einen Termin machen. I would like to make an appointment. Or, meine Tochter geht in die Schule. My daughter goes to school. You can also ask, Können Sie mir bitte helfen? Could you please help me? At this level, you can understand common expressions and have short conversations about familiar topics. But if two native speakers suddenly start talking very quickly, you may still think, okay, what just happened? And that's completely normal. A2 means I can manage basic everyday communication. B1, becoming independent. Now we arrive at a very interesting stage, B1. At B1, you are no longer limited to isolated words and very short sentences. You can connect ideas. For example, Ich lerne Deutsch, weil ich in Deutschland arbeiten möchte. I am learning German because I want to work in Germany. Notice what happened. You're not simply saying, Ich lerne Deutsch. You're explaining why. You might also say, Leider kann ich morgen nicht kommen, weil ich einen Arzttermin habe. Unfortunately, I cannot come tomorrow because I have a doctor's appointment. At B1, you can usually deal with many familiar situations more independently. You can describe experiences, talk about your plans, explain a problem, and give simple reasons for your opinions. B1 is therefore an important milestone for many German learners. You may also encounter references to B1 in different areas of life in Germany. However, official language requirements depend on the specific situation, so always check the current requirements that apply to you. The easiest way to remember B1 is, I can handle many everyday situations independently. B2, confident communication. Next comes B2, and this is where conversations can become much more interesting. At B2, you can express opinions in greater detail. For example, Meiner Meinung nach wäre es besser, wenn wir zuerst eine andere Lösung ausprobieren. In my opinion, it would be better if we tried another solution first. That's quite different from A1 German. At B2, you can understand more complex conversations and discuss a wider range of subjects. You can explain advantages and disadvantages. You can participate more actively in meetings. You can have more detailed conversations with colleagues. And communicating with German speakers generally becomes much easier. Of course, you can still make mistakes. B2 does not mean perfect German. It means you have reached a level where you can communicate relatively confidently and independently in many situations. So think of B2 as, I can communicate confidently about many everyday and professional topics. C1, Advanced German. Now we're entering advanced territory. C1, at this level, German is no longer only about managing everyday situations. You can understand demanding texts and conversations and express complicated ideas clearly. For example, obwohl der Vorschlag auf den ersten Blick sinnvoll erscheint, sollten wir auch die langfristigen Auswirkungen berücksichtigen. That means, although the proposal appears reasonable at first glance, we should also consider the long-term consequences. That's a long way from Wo ist der Bahnhof? At C1, you can express yourself fluently and use German effectively in professional, academic, and social situations. C1 can be particularly valuable in environments where sophisticated language is important, such as certain academic programs or language-intensive professions. Exact requirements, however, vary between institutions and professions. Think of C1 as, I can use German fluently in complex and demanding situations. C2, the highest level. And finally, we reach C2. C2 is the highest level in the CEFR system. At this level, a person can understand almost everything they hear or read. They can follow complex arguments, understand subtle differences in meaning, and express themselves very precisely. But there is one important misunderstanding to avoid. C2 does not necessarily mean, I sound exactly like a native German speaker. A person can have C2 level German and still have an accent. C2 is about extremely high language proficiency, not about erasing where you come from. Think of C2 as, I can communicate with a very high degree of precision and understanding. Let's compare the levels. Now, let's make the difference really clear. Imagine I ask 5 German learners the same question, why are you learning German? An A1 learner might say, Deutsch ist wichtig, German is important. At A2, ich lerne Deutsch für meine Arbeit. I learn German for my job. At B1, ich lerne Deutsch, weil ich in Deutschland arbeiten und besser mit anderen Menschen sprechen möchte. I learn German because I want to work in Germany and communicate better with other people. At B2, gute Deutschkenntnisse sind für mich wichtig, weil sie mir sowohl beruflich als auch im Alltag mehr Möglichkeiten bieten. Good German skills are important to me because they give me more opportunities both professionally and in everyday life. And at C1. Für mich sind gute Deutschkenntnisse nicht nur beruflich von Bedeutung, sondern auch entscheidend dafür, mich langfristig in Deutschland zu integrieren und aktiv am gesellschaftlichen Leben teilzunehmen. Now, you can really see the progression. A1 doesn't mean you are bad at German, it means you're at the beginning of the journey. As your level increases, you don't simply learn more words. You become able to express more complicated thoughts, understand more difficult language, and communicate more naturally. What level should you aim for? So now comes the big question. What level of German do you actually need? The answer is, it depends on your goal. If you are a complete beginner, don't worry about C1 or C2 yet. Your first target is A1. Then, A1 becomes A2, A2 becomes B1, B1 becomes B2, and if your education, career, or personal goals require it, you can continue to C1 and C2. For basic, everyday communication, A1 and A2 get you started. B1 gives you much more independence. B2 can be extremely useful for professional and social communication, and C1 or higher can become important in demanding academic and professional environments. If you need German for an official purpose, such as immigration, residence, citizenship, university, or a regulated profession, always check the current official requirement for your specific situation. Don't simply rely on what somebody told you several years ago. Conclusion. And that's the German language system from A1 to C2. Remember, A1, your first German, A2, basic everyday communication, B1, becoming independent, B2, confident communication, C1, advanced German, C2, highly proficient German. And here's perhaps the most important thing to remember. You do not have to speak perfect German from day one. Learning a language is a journey. At A1, ordering something in German might feel like a victory. Later, at B1, you may suddenly realize that you just had an entire conversation in German. And one day, you might be sitting in a meeting, studying at university, or talking with friends and realize, I didn't even have to translate that in my head. So don't ask yourself, when will my German finally be perfect? Ask yourself, what is my next level? If you're learning German or planning your life in Germany, subscribe for more simple explanations about the German language, everyday life, and how things work in Germany. And if you're currently learning German, tell us in the comments, what is your level right now? A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, or are you just getting started? Bis zum nächsten Mal. And good luck with your German.